Thank you, Honourable Speaker, for this opportunity to say a few words. At the committee stage discussion on the votes on the Ministry of Highways, Transport and of Labour, the disparity that our population faces was well exposed when on the day the Kalini Bridge new entrance was opened. The Kinya ferry tragedy also took place. When we have 2 or 3 bridges entering Colombo from the north, and we celebrated the 3rd bridge. There were children dying by capsizing of a ferry without a bridge to cross that lagoon. But before I say anything more on the matters under discussion today, with your permission, I want to place on record certain other matters relating to the visit by the Tamil National Alliance delegation to the United States of America, Canada and Britain, because while I was away, there were speculation in the media and other places as to what this constituted. So let me first make a brief comment about those matters before I speak on the votes of these ministries. There is concern that some people express, saying what is essentially an internal matters of internal affairs are being internationalized, and that the Tamil National Alliance is inviting foreign interference into internal affairs. But one must look at the history of how these things came to be. The Indo-Lanka Accord was signed in 1987, consequent to 4 years of involvement by the Government of India. After July 1983, the Government of India extended or offered its good officers to resolve the Tamil national question of this country. The offer of good officers by India was accepted by President Jayawardena. It is thereafter that the special envoy was appointed and negotiations took place, and eventually on the 29th of July 1987, Indo-Lanka Accord was signed. Mr. Speaker would remember these events very clearly because you even lost your seat in Parliament when you protested at those events. Sri Lanka continuously made promises then to India and thereafter to the whole international community about how a new form of arrangement, governance arrangement, would be made. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution was passed consequent to the signing of Indo-Lanka Accord, but even at that point in time, it was deemed insufficient. In fact, in November 1987, President Jayawardena visited New Delhi and gave in writing that those defects that were identified would be rectified. So this issue was not confined within the country. With the consent of the government of that day, India was invited and an international bilateral treaty was signed. that subsists even today. In international law, there is a concept called pactum sunt servanda, that these agreements cannot be breached. You cannot even cite domestic law to get away from your obligations under international treaties. Following on this, there were several attempts made. Following on the assurance by the Sri Lankan government that 13th Amendment to the Constitution would be improved upon, several attempts were made under different presidents, under different governments. There was a Mangala Munasinghe Select Committee under President Premadasa that made recommendations. There was Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga government's proposals in 1995, 1997, and then the Constitution Bill that was brought to this House in August 2000. There was Oslo Communique in December 2002 by Professor G.L. Piris, who said at a press conference in Oslo, and I quote, "Responding to a proposal by the leadership of the LTTE, the parties agreed to explore a solution founded on the principle of internal self-determination in areas of historical habitation of the Tamil-speaking people, based on a federal structure within a united Sri Lanka. The parties acknowledged that the solution had to be acceptable to all communities, and the parties agreed to, on that basis, discuss matters further." So, end quote. So, the current Minister for External Affairs, Professor Piris, in 2002 December, said this. Not only that, I have written pieces by Professor Piris detailing why he says that the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was fundamentally flawed. So this is not only something that we say, this is what Professor Piris has said time and again. This is, I'm quoting from P. Navaratnaraja Memorial Oration titled "From the Bandaranaike Chelvanayagam Pact to the Draft Constitutional Proposals," made on 28th July 1997 at the BMICH, where detailing his views on the 13th Amendment, this is what Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs said, and I quote, "What is more, in my view, the 13th Amendment has inflicted irreparable damage on the procedures and techniques of negotiating with regard to constitutional and ethnic amity. This is because the 13th Amendment has bred a great deal of cynicism. This is so because there is a wide gulf between the appearance and the reality. At first blush, if you look at the 13th Amendment, you get the impression that there has been generous and substantial devolution of power. It's a mirage. It is an illusion. It is a mere sleight of hand because it does not bear scrutiny for one moment. What is given with one hand can be taken back with impunity with the other. The ipse dixit of the central government that the formulation of a national policy is required in respect of the manner which has been perpetually devolved to the periphery is sufficient ground for responsibility in respect of that matter to be taken back into the hands of the centre. That is not something hypothetical or fanciful. It happened on at least two occasions. It happened with regard to the Agrarian Services Bill, and it happened with regard to the Transport Commission Bill. And we are discussing, in court, discussing the Transport Commission, Transport Ministry votes today, and I find the State Ministry of Transport and all of that is being handled from the centre, whilst in the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, it is an entirely devolved subject matter. So what Professor Piris said in 1997, that this is not just fanciful. It actually did happen, and we are debating it here in the center, what is clearly a matter that is devolved to the provinces. I quote Professor Peiris further: "No authority, no human being can repose the slightest degree of confidence in such mechanisms and structures which can be dismantled, distorted and abused at the whim and caprice of those who exercise the levers of power. It is that exercise that has left in the minds of the minorities of this country a lingering sense of cynicism which makes them reluctant to believe that somebody else can be more sincere and more genuine than those who were responsible for that regrettable exercise. That is the sum total of the damage which that particular development inflicted on the whole process directed towards the achievement of communal and ethnic amity of our land. We will not be a party to it. We will not revive or resuscitate it under any circumstance whatsoever. We shall not take part in what is undoubtedly an insincere exercise." Now, he has continuously maintained that position, and that is why in August 2000, when a constitution bill was presented, it had clearly delineated powers between the province and the centre. There was no concurrent list in that proposal. Not only in that proposal, but even under President Mahinda Rajapaksa, when APRC was constituted under Professor Tissa Vitarana, now a member of parliament, the proposals by Professor Tissa Vitarana in the APRC also did not have a concurrent list. It suggested clear delineation of powers between the province and the centre, so that what was given to the province was given entirely to the province, not to be interfered with or taken back by the centre. So those were the developments. That was the progress that was made. Nevertheless, to date, we are to see any of that actually realized. President Mahinda Rajapaksa made a joint statement on the 26th of May 2009 with visiting Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon. Now, if this was entirely an internal matter, why did President Rajapaksa make that joint communique with the visiting Secretary General of the United Nations? I quote from that joint communique: "President Rajapaksa expressed his firm resolve to proceed with the implementation of the 13th Amendment, as well as to begin a broader dialogue with all parties, including the Tamil parties, in the new circumstances, to further enhance this process and to bring about lasting peace and development in Sri Lanka." End quote. So, not only President J.R. Jayawardena, but President Mahinda Rajapaksa also thought it fit that a political solution to the Tamil national question was not merely an internal matter. For him to make a joint statement with the Secretary General of the United Nations on the 26th of May 2009 in Kandy. And thereafter, at least three joint statements were made. One, President Mahinda Rajapaksa with Dr. Manmohan Singh, Prime Minister of India, and two, with S.M. Krishna, then External Affairs Minister of India, with Professor G.L. Peiris, External Minister of Sri Lanka. In all of those three joint statements, it was stated that Sri Lanka would implement the 13th Amendment in full and build upon it so as to achieve meaningful devolution. S.M. Krishna made statements to this effect in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha on the 4th of August 2011. On the 17th of May 2011, a joint statement was made in Sri Lanka, and it said, I quote, a devolution package building upon the 13th Amendment would contribute towards creating the necessary conditions for such reconciliation, end quote. So, Mr. Speaker, you would see that continuously the promise has been made, and I'm saying this because today there seems to be some confusion, even among some Tamil parties, that implementation of the 13th Amendment in full would settle the question. No. The promise time and again given by successive Sri Lankan governments to India and to the world specifically stated that going beyond the 13th Amendment, building upon the 13th Amendment so as to achieve meaningful devolution would only create necessary conditions for reconciliation. Now this does not end here. The matter is before the UN Human Rights Council on resolutions that were moved by the United States of America from 2012 March onwards, with resolutions titled Promoting Accountability and Reconciliation in Sri Lanka. The last of which was passed in March this year, on the 23rd of March 2021, and the title to that resolution is Promoting Reconciliation, Accountability and Human Rights in Sri Lanka. This was passed with a majority vote, and this is what it says with regard to political solution, and I quote, calling upon the government of Sri Lanka to fulfill its commitments on the devolution of political authority, which is integral to reconciliation and the full enjoyment of human rights by all members of its population. What does it say? It calls upon the government to fulfill its own commitments. So the government has made commitments, not just once, twice, three times. No. From 1983 onwards to this day, continuously made these commitments that this matter will be resolved. When the Prime Minister of India visited Sri Lanka in March 2015, on the 13th of March 2015, he spoke in this Parliament. The visiting Indian Prime Minister, while speaking in his Parliament, said this, and I quote, I am a firm believer in corporate federalism. We are devolving more power and more resources to the states, and we are making them formal partners in national decision-making processes. He said in this House that he is a believer in corporate federalism. He was speaking in relation to the solution to their Tamil national question in this House. And his speech was applauded by all members of this House. So this is a matter on which everyone, including both parties, both major parties in this House, had given commitments and assurances, but those are yet to be realized. So it is in this background, that the Tamil National Alliance delegation went to the United States of America recently, and we are now calling upon the community of civilized nations to help us achieve these objectives which successive governments of Sri Lanka have assured the international community that they would deliver, and they are yet to deliver. The timing is also important that we did this now, because there is a different kind of promise that is being made to the country here domestically. While to the world you say enhanced devolution, we will settle this matter once and for all by enhancing powers of devolution to the periphery. Locally, something else is being said now. A slogan titled "One Country, One Law" is being projected. Now what does that mean? If one country, one law is to become reality, then there cannot be any legislative power to the provinces. How can provinces exercise meaningful legislative powers if there is going to be one country, one law? If there is going to be one law for the entire country. That is not what is contemplated by devolution of legislative power. As it is in our constitution, there is legislative power devolved to the provinces, on some matters exclusively to the provinces, and therefore there cannot be one law for the whole country. And the promise to India and to the world has been that you will enhance that power of devolution, that there will be more devolution, that 13th Amendment would be implemented in full, but it doesn't stop there. It says, and building upon it so as to achieve meaningful devolution, conceding thereby that even the 13th Amendment to the Constitution does not confer a meaningful scheme of devolution, that you must go beyond that. Now this has been decades-long promise given to the world, but now locally, domestically, you are trying to travel in the opposite direction. And that is why, as representatives of the Tamil people of this country, as those who represent the north and the east provinces of this country, we have appealed to the world, to the community of civilized nations, to help us resolve this issue. Although solutions must be found within Sri Lanka, we recognize that. The community of civilized nations has a very definite and a legitimate role to play in this exercise. Therefore, we appealed to the United States of America, who led the resolutions on Sri Lanka from March 2012 onwards on promoting accountability and reconciliation in Sri Lanka in the United Nations Human Rights Council, to Great Britain and members of the core group of the entire civilized nations to assist us in this process. We are entitled to do that. We are a people in this country. We have certain rights as a people in this country. We have lived in this country as long as anybody else has, or even longer. As people in international law, we are entitled to the right of self-determination. Of course, we are prepared to exercise that right of self-determination internally. We have said that very, very clearly. Within a united, undivided, and even indivisible Sri Lanka, we are prepared to exercise that right of self-determination. But I must say this very clearly in this House. We have already said it in our proposals that we sent to the experts committee appointed by the President, that the international law is that if a people who are entitled to the right to self-determination are consistently and persistently denied that exercise of self-determination internally, through an internal arrangement, if they are denied that right, they would then become entitled to exercise it externally. So this is a time when we have expressed, as representatives of our people, the consent of our people, the readiness of our people to exercise our right to self-determination internally, within a united country. We are still willing to do that. But if that is consistently and persistently denied, as you are proving more and more, then we will become entitled to have it exercised externally. And I am appealing to the government that if we are serious about a new constitution to this country, a third Republican constitution, don't make the mistakes that were made when the first Republican constitution was formulated and when the second Republican constitution was formulated. We tried an exercise in the last parliament when all the parties sat together in the Constitutional Assembly and we arrived at great consensus in many matters. We reached consensus. Unfortunately, before that draft could become a reality, that government failed due to internal dissension and various other reasons. But we were able to arrive at consensus as recent as January 2019, when a draft was presented by the then Prime Minister to his House. It is possible. We can arrive at that consensus. We can build upon that consensus. As representatives of the Tamil people, we are even today able to say that we are willing to live within one country. But that must be with the full acknowledgement of our rights as a people entitled to the right to self-determination. And on this occasion, when I have placed on record and explained the recent delegation visit of the Tamil National Alliance to various countries and called on their help to resolve this issue, I want to make that also very clear to the government, that as we have said and acted in good faith, we expect a reciprocal gesture from the government to discuss with us. Unfortunately, the President invited the Tamil National Alliance for talks on this matter in July this year and then postponed it, saying that very soon another date would be given. 5 months have passed and that hasn't happened. That must happen. If this issue is to be resolved once and for all by all the peoples of this country agreeing, and that is not very difficult, then the principal representatives of the Tamil people, the Tamil National Alliance, and the government which has the mandate of the rest of the country must sit down and resolve this issue. Resolve it on the basis of consensus that have already been reached several times over. I'm not saying that we must reinvent the wheel or we must start from scratch. That consensus is available. It has been arrived upon time and again. It's only a matter of will. And if this government claims that they have the mandate of the majority, then you must act as a government and behave in that way and move forward. We are willing to come with you. As the party that has the majority support of the Tamil people of this country, we are willing to come forward with you to resolve this issue. We have called on the world to support us because the world must know this is no longer an internal issue. Finding a solution may be, yes, we must all agree. But the concern of the world is upon us and we have asked for their support. And we have their support. That our position is a reasonable position. Our position is a justifiable position. And we must resolve it in that way. You have agreed to discuss it with India. You have agreed time and again and given assurances to India, very clearly stating what that assurance is. You have given that assurance to the Secretary General of the UN, no less, to the entire community of civilized nations. So we have their support. We have that entire support with us that this matter must be resolved. You can't now start reversing. You can't start traveling in the opposite direction. You can't say one country, one law after having agreed that there must be meaningful devolution of powers. You had agreed even that it must be done in a federal structure. And you can't go back on these promises. If you keep going back like that, it will spell disaster to the whole country. So I'm thankful to the Chief Opposition Whip for having given me this extended time today to make a proper statement and put a stop to various speculations that in the media as to why we went to the different countries. We went to gain support for our quest, which is justifiable, which is reasonable, which is legitimate, and support of the international community in a matter which is no longer an internal affair. And that is why we went, and I want to make it plain, very clear to this House and to the country, and that we will pursue that objective. We will not take a step back, because the quest for political freedom for our people is a justifiable objective for which we have had the mandate since 1956. Our people have voted for this since 1956. In between, for a while, they even voted to have a separate state created. But nevertheless, it has been consistent expression of the democratic mandate of our people to have powers devolved meaningfully. We have called it federal, call it what you may like, but it is meaningful devolution of powers that we seek as a people entitled to the right to self-determination. So I'm thankful that the time was given for me to express this. With regard to the votes on the ministries, I do not want to say anything further than what I said as I commenced my speech, and I would like to conclude with these observations. Thank you very much.